ตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ And for those of you who follow the life of the Sangha and the Buddhist calendar, you'll be aware that in a couple of days we finish the annual rains retreat, 3 months retreat. It's a time of ending. Retreat is obviously a period of time we designate as a time of retreat. So it has a beginning, it has an ending. And that's very much how the flavor of our life as human beings, isn't it? We're constantly experiencing the beginning and ending of things. Whether it's a day followed by a night. Just now as we were sitting, the light in the sky outside this hall disappeared and the night sky has arrived. So the day has gone, now we're at night. Tomorrow morning the night will end and we'll be back with a new day. In a few days the Vasa retreat will end. Then we'll be in a new period of time as far as the calendar goes. The seasons are changing, so here in Melbourne we're in spring, preparing for summer. Today is Sunday, so tomorrow many people will start work again on a Monday, or go to school or study. Life is like that, isn't it? It's full of cycles of beginnings and endings. And when you practice mindfulness, just as we were just now, being mindful of the breath going in, breath going out, the beginning of one breath, then the ending of a breath. You see that everything is like this, is arising and passing away, beginning and ending, birth and death all the time. Every moment of every day someone dies in this world and somebody is born. There's so many people in the world, there's multiple people are born, multiple people die at every moment of every day. Thousands and hundreds of thousands of people are born and die every day. And the Buddha said it's a very valuable thing to use our time, our intelligence to investigate and reflect on this, just the natural change of life. Changes of this body, the changes in our mental activity, and then the changes of the world around us. This is where we get wisdom and understanding. The very last teaching the Buddha gave, his final teaching to the monks, was that all formations are impermanent, so strive on with heedfulness. So be mindful of the impermanent, changing nature of physical and mental formations. That was his very last teaching. It's also the very first insight of an enlightened student of the Buddha, Venerable Kondanya. We say Anya Kondanya, and Venerable Kondanya is the first one who knew the Dhamma. Kondanya knows the Dhamma, is what they exclaimed when he was hearing the first teaching of the Buddha, the Dhammacakka Sutta. And his insight at that time was that all conditions, phenomena, physical, mental formations that are subject to arising are also subject to cessation. Whatever arises must cease. Whatever is born must die. So it kind of encapsulates the whole of the Dhamma teaching and the path of practice, the life of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha, the practice of the Sangha. What we're doing is begins with birth and death, or arising and cessation, and it ends with arising and cessation. So the more you contemplate that through your practice, through your life, you can see how there's a chance for you to see and understand the nature of life by reflecting on the constant changing nature of conditions. And this is where we can find some peace and what we call equanimity, detached awareness that arises from seeing the way things are, the fact that everything is subject to arising and ceasing. And it also, by reflecting on this, it also exposes where suffering comes from in our life. Because a lot of our suffering comes when we don't accept change. What is it that we fear most in life? Is death. You ask any ordinary person, what do you think about death? They probably say they don't want to think about it. Even to talk about it, they're not comfortable. To think about it, they're not happy. The only time we sort of confront death nowadays is as a form of entertainment, in a horror movie or some kind of murder mystery movie or something. Then people like it because of the thrill, and because it's not their death, then they can enjoy it as just a sort of a stimulating experience on a screen or in a book. But normally, the idea of death brings us fear. We don't like it. We don't want it. And yet it's as natural to life as birth. Where there's birth, there must be death. So the Buddha encouraged us to use this simple truth to get deeper insight and understanding of the way this world is and the way we are. We all, having been born, must get older, and with aging we get sickness, and eventually we get death. And that's just the way it is, it's nature. So the Buddha even said we could use this as a meditation. The contemplation of death is called Maranusati. And the Buddha encouraged us to practice it a lot. He says one who practices the recollection of death a lot will gain great benefit and bring great peace and wisdom to that person. So the very thing we are afraid of and we don't want to think about, don't like, don't want in any form, is the thing that can bring us peace, wisdom, understanding. So maybe it's worth our while to investigate that in our lives, to take the time to contemplate and recollect death as an object of mind, we say, as an object of meditation and as an object or a theme of contemplation. Because we don't like it, if we're left to our own devices, to ourselves, well, we're not going to think much about death. It's too depressing. Brings up too much anxiety and worry. But maybe it's in our best interest to take some time and contemplate it. So the recollection of the death is one of those meditations the Buddha said practice daily, every day. And there's really no limits to that, in the sense that the Buddha said the Buddha is recollecting death, the impermanence of this body, mind, what we call the five khandhas, every breath in, every breath out, he's recollecting the changing nature of these khandhas, the fact that they're arising and ceasing or being born and dying every moment. What happens when we recollect death? Well, it makes us very alert, doesn't it? It brings us to the present moment, cuts through a lot of the trivial, random thoughts we have, all the sort of side tracks that the mind goes on, the blind alleys and the wandering mind. When you think of death, it brings you right back to the present moment. It gives you a sort of edge, a sort of tension, which can obviously lead into anxiety or fear or anguish, but in a modest way, maybe it's quite useful to have that little bit of tension. Perhaps that's why the Buddha encouraged us to reflect on death, because it makes us alert. And if you walk around in a forest or a wilderness area at night, especially if you don't have a very good light or a torch, you're alert because that you might step on something you don't want to step on. You might trip over something. So it's quite a good practice to be in a monastery or in the forest when it's dark, because it makes you alert. And monks even choose very desolate places to go and practice, where there's wild animals or graveyards where there may be fear of ghosts, because it makes them very alert when they do their meditation. If you've ever encountered a wild animal in the middle of the night, like a snake, tiger, elephant, obviously it's a very rare experience nowadays, but if you ever have, you know what I mean. It makes your heart pump and you don't sleep. If you've ever met a tiger, you won't sleep again for the rest of that night. So a little bit of fear or tension can be quite good in the practice. And this recollection of death helps. Sometimes we get it from the place, of going to quiet, lonely places. Sometimes when we're at home in a very comfortable place, but just recollecting death can bring up that same awareness and alertness that the Buddha was encouraging. Because it's from this alertness that we start to see the mind and know our own mind. And we're less prone to get caught up into the delusions of our moods. If this was the last moment of your life, would you be spending all your time thinking about that thing you want, that new item of clothing you want to buy, or that nice food you want to eat? If it was the last moment of your life before your death, you're just not going to be bothered with it, are you? Or you're going to be thinking about the grudge against that person that you've been harboring and holding on to for a while now. You'd be happy to let it go. You don't want that cluttering up your mind at the end of your life. So the recollection of death is like that. The benefit is immediate, and it helps us to let go of what doesn't really matter, what's not that important. So it's a meditation that's been used by people since the time of the Buddha. It's something recommended by the wise. Recollect death, contemplate death regularly. And then you start to see it more, to see the impermanence of things in many areas of life, not just the recollection of my death or somebody we love, their death, but just this natural phenomena and flow of arising and ceasing of phenomena. So Ajahn Chah said, look at the birth and death of your mental states. This is another form of recollection of death, just seeing how every thought arises and then ceases, is born and then dies. And as you're meditating, you become familiar with this pattern of another thought, another mood coming up, being born. But you establish mindfulness, you let go, and then it disappears. So it's born and then it dies. It could be a mood of pleasure, enjoying something, but then it ends, so that pleasure fades. Could be a mood of fear, anxiety, comes up, takes you over your mind, and then it fades. And the more you contemplate this, the more you become familiar with the arising and passing away of mental states, feelings, memories, and the changes in the physical body itself. Really, our experience of this body and mind is just a constant process of arising and ceasing of phenomena. And the recollection of death in particular, impermanence and death, is one avenue, one pathway into seeing and understanding the true nature of your own body and mind. Whatever arises cannot last forever, because it was something that was created. Whether it's just a concoction of the mind, you put yourself in a certain kind of mood of expectation, desire, fear, worry, anxiety, aversion, irritation, boredom. You concoct these moods, they come up into existence, they're there for a while, and then they die, they pass away. So if you reflect like this, you actually become familiar and get to know the whole experience of birth and death, and you're seeing it all the time in your very own thoughts, feelings and sensations, in the thoughts, the experiences of other people around you, the seasons, the weather, the arising and passing away of the things in your day. You start one thing and then end it. You move from this place to another. There's a starting, there's an ending. The more you practice like this, you become quite familiar with the birth and death of experience. Going to sleep at night is like dying, isn't it? You don't have to call it dying, because one of our problems with recollection of death is that the term death brings up all these negative connotations, negative perceptions. It brings up fear, aversion. I don't want it, don't like it. So don't call it death, just call it ending or cessation maybe. So when you go to bed at night, what's happening? Or that day is ending for you. You go to sleep and your mind goes into bhavanga, doesn't know anything for a few hours, then it wakes up. It's like birth again. So literally every night we're experiencing the death or the ending of the mind. It's still there, it's gone to sleep and you don't know anything. And then you wake up and you start remembering again. It's like being born again. It's just the normal cycle of human existence. What arises must cease. What begins ends. Birth and death. We come together, so this live stream begins, then it will end. When we meet people, we're excited and stimulated when we meet them. We're usually happy, or if it's somebody where, our boss or somebody who's got a problem with us, maybe we're afraid when we meet them. And then it ends, that meeting ends. Maybe it goes better than we thought it would. Maybe it goes worse than we thought it would. But it ends. That's the one constant, isn't it? The fact of every meeting, there's a beginning and an end. We say hello, and then we say goodbye. And it's just going on every day, isn't it? We're constantly experiencing separation from people, from experiences. This is the birth and death of life, the changing nature of our life as human beings. So if you look at it in this way, you can see you're recollecting death, you're just seeing and noticing the birth and death of experience all the time. And it's a really useful thing to do, even though at first it's a little bit unpleasant, makes us feel uncomfortable. It's worth persisting with, because it brings us so much understanding that this is the way things are. And it doesn't mean to say when you meet someone, you're going to separate from them at the end of that conversation or that meeting. Doesn't mean to say, well, no point even meeting in the first place. That's not the point, is it? You still can meet with people for business, for family, for pleasure, for other reasons. It's simply adjusting your mind to the way things are. So then separation, you're more familiar with the idea of separation, so you can accept it. And every time you separate from somebody who's a friend or a work colleague or a fellow Dhamma practitioner, sooner or later it will be the last time you meet that person. Maybe this year, next year, or in 20 years from now, who knows. But one day you will separate. And that's normal. And if you've been practicing being mindfulness of death and the ending and cessation of things, when it comes, you can say, I've been preparing for this. I was expecting this because I've already been contemplating it. Even your own death or the death of a loved one, if you've been preparing yourself in this way, when it comes, you can accept it because you know that's the way of life. Things begin, things end. What's born must die. So the contemplation of death as a meditation and as a theme of recollection as part of your practice is invaluable. Getting used to the way the world is. Because, the way of suffering is always clinging on to things. Clinging implies, you cling, You don't want it to leave you. You don't want to separate from it. You don't want it to change. You don't want it to die on you. So if you can't see the natural changing nature of phenomena, you suffer. When we experience success, we cling to it. We don't want to lose it. When we get the things we want, the pleasant things we want, we cling on, getting that last bit of juice out of it, whatever it may be. You know, if it's sensual objects, you know, pleasant sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. You know, the Buddha, Ajahn Kalyano, used to say it's just like a dog with his bone. He's got this dry old bone and he's just clinging on to it, chewing it, trying to get the last bit of taste out of it. And he won't let anyone else get near it. You know, that's clinging, isn't it? You're not accepting separation or the ending of things. And sometimes things have ended a long time ago, but we still cling on with, you know, the mind through memory, good and bad. So we cling to the good experiences of the past, and you know, just wish that we could go back there, relive it, get back there, have it again, re-experience it, hold on to it. And we cling to the bad. So the unpleasant things, sometimes we keep bringing them up, dragging them back up with our memory and rethinking them through, reliving them, re-experiencing them and suffering with them. Guilt is like that, isn't it? Endlessly feeling bad about something you did or something that happened to you. You hurt someone, you let someone down, you let yourself down, you made a mistake, this bad, unpleasant thing happened, and you're just reliving it over and over again, even though it ended a long time ago. But one of the valuable things with contemplating birth and death is you can see, well, okay, that thing happened, that experience happened, I made my mistake, I had my pain and suffering then, but it's over. I don't have to keep holding on to it, I can let it go. So we learn to let go of the good. What was good, but let it go. What was bad, let it go. And this is keeping your mind in good mental health, isn't it? Understanding that the nature of the experience is temporary. There's a teacher we respect that Luang Por Chah used to encourage us to think about. One teacher is called Jiao Kun No. He lived in Wat Tape Sarin. Tape Sarin is a big temple in Bangkok, and he's often known affectionately as the Arahant, the enlightened monk in the city, because he lived all his life in a city temple, which is not a normal place for meditation monks to live, because it's in a city, it's busy, noisy, people coming and going. But he was held up by Luang Por Chah as a great example of someone who practiced even in a not ideal situation and reached Nibbana there. And he had many, many great practices for recollecting the impermanent nature of things to help him teach himself to let go of his clinging. So one of his practices was he got a coffin. When he first became a monk, he got a coffin put in his monk's hut as the bed, and he slept in it every night. He'd go to bed at night and sleep in his coffin. So he'd wake up in a coffin. When do you see that? It was only in horror movies, isn't it? Your worst nightmare is you wake up in a coffin and you think you're trapped there and you're going to die, and it's considered a way of torture someone by putting them in a coffin. But this is a monk who voluntarily, using his wisdom, says this is a good way to teach me about the impermanence of life, the impermanence of this body. So he would sleep in a coffin, wake up in a coffin. It's to teach himself to be awake to and alert to the changing nature of conditions and the impermanence of life. So you can imagine the very end of his life, he wasn't surprised or shocked by the fact that he was going to die, because he'd been contemplating it all through his life as a monk. And he wasn't someone who was depressed. His mind was very peaceful, bright, and happy. But he could see that it's the nature of human existence, is it's bound up with birth and death. In his later years, he actually got cancer, but carried on his practice. And another reason Ajahn Chah praised him is because every day he attended the morning and evening puja sessions in the monastery, the sitting and meditation and chanting every morning, every evening. The only day he missed his evening chanting was the day he died. He was just too weak to get up from his bed to get to the hall. Only once did he miss it. If you ever see a picture of him later in his later years, he has an unpleasant growth, cancerous growth on his neck, which is very visible in photographs. So obviously, that was growing, and eventually it killed him. But he'd been sleeping in a coffin for many years, so it wasn't like he wasn't prepared for that. What he'd learned was not to attach with fear to the body and to the things of this world like we normally do. We normally don't want to separate from everyone we love and like, the things of this world, the pleasant experiences. We just want more of them. We want life to go on and on and on, and that's the main delusion which causes us suffering. This is why we're afraid of death. We're afraid of the ending of things. We're afraid of the ending of the body, the pain and discomfort, and just the loss of everything we love and like. That's what brings fear. If you keep contemplating it, become familiar with it, the fear starts to dissolve and disappear, and you just become used to the way things are, and you realize our real refuge is in the mind that sees the truth. And that mind, we call that the mind that is the mind of the deathless, the amata Dhamma. The mind that is not attached to birth and death, the arising and ceasing of things, body, physical things, material things, mind, thoughts, feelings, ideals. The mind that sees through all of that is not attached, and that's the mind that sees the deathless, and it's free of suffering. The only way out of this kind of suffering is to face it and contemplate it. And it may be hard at first, but little by little we have to start opening up to the truth. Next week they say we're going to open up from lockdown. That's one kind of opening up. But opening up in the Dhamma is opening up our mind to the truth, the way things are, through bringing up mindfulness and contemplating and coming to an acceptance and understanding. This is how it is. If your mind is clear on the way things are, then it sees there's nothing to be afraid of with the birth and death of this body, because that's just the way it is, and it's not your body anyway. You don't own it. It's just part of nature that is born and then dies. The mind that knows that doesn't die. That's what we call the deathless. So it's like the mind knows the body as something that comes from the womb of our mother, was a little baby, grew up into a child, a teenager, youth, middle age, old age, then it dies. The mind can know that, so it's as if this body is arising and passing away, and there's a mind that knows that and doesn't grasp, doesn't attach, so it doesn't suffer. The reason we suffer is because we grasp that, we take ownership of the body, other people's bodies, family, our loved ones, our friends, our partner, our parents, our children, and then our material things, our house, our wealth, our possessions. As long as we grasp at these things and don't see them as subject to arising and ceasing, then we suffer. When we see them as impermanent, the mind is released. The mind opens to the truth, it's released, it can let go and be at ease and at peace, even with the arising and passing away of things we love and like. So the contemplation of impermanence, the contemplation of death, is what leads us to the deathless, beyond birth and death. True peace. It's not easy, of course, but it can be done because there are those who have practiced it and realized it, and they've out of compassion, have shown us the way. Whether it's the Buddha or Jalkun No, the teacher that Luang Por Chah used to talk about. He used to say death is like his best friend. It's funny, isn't it? It's not the way the world talks, isn't it? But people who practice the Dhamma, they have a new take on things, and they turn dukkha, or that which you would think of as suffering, into something useful that gives rise to wisdom and understanding and peace. So he said, sleeping in a coffin, contemplating death is like being with a good friend, because it reminds him not to cling to that which is not yours, which has to be let go of. The more you contemplate death and become familiar with it, the freer your mind is. The more you push it away, deny it, hide from it, run away from it, suppress it, the more you suffer. So don't be afraid to think about death sometimes, talk about it, contemplate it, meditate on it. It's not what we want, it's not what we like, but it can be turned into a tool for our own wisdom and development. You turn something that's unpleasant into something that's actually useful to you. You can turn dukkha into your best teacher. Who's your best teacher is the onset of death. When do people become their most mindful is when they're facing death. When you are facing terminal illness or unknown sort of risks, it makes you very mindful. And when you're mindful, you're in more control. You can let go of negative thoughts, worries, fears better. It actually prompts good things when we turn it into part of the practice. So don't be afraid to contemplate the impermanence of your life. It can really bring you good things. So tonight maybe I'll leave the teaching there, and we can have a chance to have a question and answer session after this.